And I forgive them. Because I would have been like them if I didn't have the access to the kind of conversations that I've had, if I didn't have the kind of mindset that I have, that my personality that is just immune to bullshit. When bullshit hits me, I'm go, oh, I know what this is. I grew up without a dad, okay? I don't trust people. I think there's a lot of bullshit in the world.
All of them recognize that this is fudging, because they had went the wrong direction by taking the ether out of the equation. And now I have proof of the ether and how it behaves.
Wow. I wish I could really, truly understand exactly what you're saying, because I'm kind of getting it and you're doing a great job explaining it. But if you're right, that really changes everything.
What did I say that wasn't true, though? That's what I'm, I
well,
mean,
one times one is not equal to two. Let's start there. In fact, I'm angry at Joe because Joe should have pushed back on that. Joe is in awe.
The calculator says 1 times 1 doesn't equal 1.
So a few weeks ago on May 18th of 2024, Joe Rogan had Terrence Howard on the podcast for the first time ever. And it turned out to be a massive episode because it quickly got over 10 million views on his YouTube channel alone. And it went absolutely viral everywhere else. And honestly, it made sense because not only was Terrence saying some wild stuff that was taking over the internet for the whole week and had everyone talking about it, but at the same time, he was so delusional and thought it was a good idea to try and call out and expose actual scientists and physicists, and he was saying that he knew some stuff that they didn't, and he was teaching it online, which naturally made the episode and everything a lot more controversial, and everyone wanted to give their opinion on it, and they did. So in this video, we'll go through the quick rise and fall of Terrence Howard, which involves both of his appearances on the Joe Rogan Experience, the first time a month and a half ago, which once again went completely viral, and most recently with Eric Weinstein, in which he got completely destroyed. So let's get started.
I didn't come into this world the way everybody else does, I don't think. I used to think that everybody had the similar experience, but like if I asked you, what was your first memory in life? What would it be?
I don't think I know.
My first memory was almost like when you're dreaming and you're falling and you hit the bottom and you wake up.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first memory, but I didn't wake up here. I was inside my mother's womb. And I was about maybe 6 months inside the womb. And I'm like, okay, don't forget I'm here. Okay. Don't forget. You go to sleep. You wake up again. Now something's moving in front of you. And you're like, oh, that's my friend. But I had a different name for it. I didn't know it was my hand. I remember all of that.
You remember coming out?
Remember being compressed, and you want to panic, but you're flooded with like some serotonin and dopamine to where you feel relaxed. You go right back to sleep. You remember being born. I remember being circumcised. I remember the whole 9 and the proof of it. So I reached out to DeGrasse Tyson. I saw him at an event up front, at Fox. And he was like, hey, man, yeah, I'd love for you to come on my show, do my radio, do my TV thing. I would love that. I was like, yeah, but I've got something I want to introduce to you. And I told him it was controversial, and I sent him over the 36-page thing that had the wave conjugations in it, but I started it off with 1 times 1 equaling 2. And he went in on my treatise, redlined everything.
Now, you could argue that Joe Rogan is no scientist or mathematician, and so because of that, he couldn't really ask the tough questions when it came to Terrence Howard. However, if we look back at their first conversation, the first time that Terrence was on the podcast, within the first 15 seconds, he begins the conversation by telling the weirdest and wildest story ever about how he remembered being born. And you would think that someone like Joe Rogan would quickly call that out, or at the very least have a lot of questions about it. But instead, he just pretended like he heard the most normal thing ever and continued on with the conversation, which is weird because you don't need to be a scientist to know that someone telling you that they remember their birth and they also came up with a new math in the same conversation is potentially not telling the truth. And funny enough, some people did point out the similarities between Terrence on Joe Rogan's podcast and the time that Cat Williams broke the internet by going on Club Shay Shay and for the whole time talking while getting no pushback from Shannon Sharp. Now, to be fair, obviously Cat Williams wasn't saying anything remotely close to what Terrence was claiming, but the point is that Joe Rogan also let Terrence talk the entire time without giving him any pushback. And now looking back, it does make you wonder if Joe Rogan did that on purpose, letting him talk so he could go viral, knowing that he would have him back on to debate an actual expert, or if Joe Rogan actually believed that Terrence Howard was a genius, which it wouldn't surprise me at this point. But if that's the case, it definitely went way too far.
He was, because I asked him, I said, under what conditions? I said, it's illogical where the square root of a number added to itself will equal more than that number squared. But that's what happens with the square root of 2. That's what happens with most of the numbers. I was like, how is it that multiplication, if it means to make more and increase in number, how is 1 times 1 equaling 1 part of the multiplication table? Now, I understand that if you're seeing it one time.
Right.
But we call that once. But the moment that you had that add the times in there, that multiplicative indicator, that means there's more than 1. So now each equation is supposed to be balanced. That equal sign is supposed to show that there's a balance between these 2 numbers over here and a balance on this one over here. What happened to the other one in this equation? You'll see hydrogen sitting all the way over there by itself, but they don't show that hydrogen has the same tone as carbon.
What do you mean by tone?
Same tone, same key of E. Same key of E. 40.5 hertz. The next one would be like 81 hertz. You go to silicone, it will double up and would be 162 hertz. You'll go to cobalt, and it'll be 324 hertz. It's, in that base, if you were to take the angles of incidence or the tones that they create, their color, like you can turn color back into sound based upon, it's the same wavelength, it's just twice as long.
And that was just one of the many things that he said that made the entire internet go crazy, which is understandable because he's not just some random dude on the internet talking the way he is. He's a pretty big name who is very persuasive and also very believable, which, is a big part of being an actor. But he also went about it the right way in terms of knowing what to say, having some strong sounding arguments, and also knowing the audience that he would be speaking to, because going on Joe Rogan's podcast was the best decision and the best move ever. And funny enough, that kind of reminded me of back in the day when Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo would actually get into heated arguments whenever Eddie would bring up some wild conspiracy theory, because back then Joe Rogan would actually get mad since Eddie Bravo had this frustrating way of debating or arguing his position, which wasn't really debating, and instead he would essentially never ever concede a point, and whenever he was cornered or proven wrong, he would just pivot to a different subject or continue to move the goalposts, and he could actually go on for hours and hours and never accept that he was wrong.
That's according to every scientist that studies it, Eddie.
How do you know that?
Because that's why it's still up.
How do you know how do you know that? You just said some stuff you don't know.
Every scientist. I don't know. Listen, there's no dispute about this. I bet Jamie could pull up 100 different fucking things that'll show you the same thing.
On the internet.
But it's not just on the internet, Eddie.
It's okay if you get information on the internet, but it's not okay if I get information. It's an information war. That's what it is. It's you get your information. There's information on both sides.
But
it's
Eddie,
okay. Internet's okay when you guys look at it, but now when I look at it,
North Star changes over time. University of what is that? Michigan.
It's only okay if you guys look at it.
Okay.
Does that make sense? That doesn't make any sense. That's not science.
Why does that not make sense?
No, I said it doesn't make sense that the internet only works for you and not for me.
No, it works when you keep looking at it over and over and over again from all these multiple sources. Wouldn't you just assume?
You
that
said
all
over and over and over. You didn't say. You said over and over and over and over, and then you didn't.
Eddie, why are you playing games? This is like you're playing tic-tac-toe. You're not looking at the truth.
Okay.
You're playing like a little jiu-jitsu game here.
Hey, if you want to believe NASA after they faked six, it's all government science.
Okay, why does you tell me then? Why does that compass point towards the north?
I don't know. You got to find one of Polaris.
Why would I look for the specific one that you're looking for?
Find Polaris.
But Eddie,
and then
come
find
on,
the
man.
time lapse.
But
Because
just look
that's
at
the
that.
only
What are
one
you
that isn't
looking at
moving
right
and,
there?
and everything's going around it.
Eddie, what are you looking at right there? When you see that time lapse photo of
I
space,
see shit spinning.
right?
Yeah.
The Earth in the sky is
Is
up
the
there.
sky spinning or is the Earth spinning?
What do you think?
I think the sky's spinning.
Jesus Christ.
And it does seem like Joe Rogan, instead of doing what he used to do with Eddie Bravo, this time he simply let Terrence talk the entire time and say whatever he wanted. And honestly, it ended up working very well because for the most part, people did realize that they couldn't take him seriously talking about Terrence, and instead they saw him more as a meme and made fun of him. However, there were some people that actually believed that he was onto something and that he was a genius. Now, to be fair, Terrence does know a lot more than the average person, but he's clearly not an expert. And it got so bad that at some point, Neil deGrasse Tyson actually responded with a great video that went absolutely viral. And in that video, he pretty much told them in the smartest and in the nicest way possible that he was too dumb to realize how dumb he was, which is pretty wild.
It's a beautiful thing that people want to participate on this frontier. What can happen is if you're a fan of a subject, let's say, a hobbyist, let's call it, it's possible to know enough about that subject to think you're right, but not enough about that subject to know that you're wrong. And so there's this sort of valley in there, a valley of false confidence. This has been studied by others, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's the phenomenon where a little bit of knowledge, you over-assess how much of that subject you actually know. And then when you learn even more, you realize, no, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. So then there's a sort of a lull there. And then when you learn even more, you come back up. Ultimately, learning enough to know whether you were right or wrong. To become an expert means you spend all this time. It doesn't happen overnight. You can't just sit in an armchair and say, I'm now an expert. It requires years and years of study, especially looking through journals where new ideas are published and contested. That's what we have learned is the most effective means of establishing that which is objectively true, or determining that which is objectively false.
And also, what's really interesting is how Terrence Howard saw that video, that response from Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he still thought it was a good idea to go on the Joe Rogan Experience and try to debate or have a conversation with an actual mathematician and a physicist about his theories, because that's just proof, that's another example of how he's not able to back down and accept that he's wrong about something. And so then it was up to Eric Weinstein to tell him to his face why and how he was wrong. And that is exactly what happened, because just last week, both Terrence Howard and Eric Weinstein were on the podcast together and had a 4-hour conversation, which was very long, but it did have a lot of very interesting moments and already has over 5 million views, which is absolutely insane. And even though Eric isn't the best when it comes to social interactions, since he has done some things in the past and has had some wild takes that makes me believe that he is very self-centered and has an insane ego, I thought he did a very good job making it very clear that Terrence Howard was wrong. And at some point, he even called out Joe Rogan for letting it get this far.
First of all, do you know who David Tong is?
I know him on the internet. I know, but I've watched a few of his things. I was very impressed with it. That's why I reached out to him.
He's amazing. And I have my difference. He's an acquaintance of mine. I haven't seen him since 2011, okay? This guy knows every aspect of physics so well that he can explain it with razor-sharp clarity. So he's a national treasure of the UK.
And I reached out and I said to him, look, dude, you're talking about these 16 fields. I said, I have the models for your 16 fields, which was
you're teaching.
Yeah.
That's okay. If you want to say, I don't understand this, you get a positive reaction from us. If you say, I have something and I'm not quite sure what it is, can I get an evaluation because I think I might have something? You should be able to get something from a guy like me.
And that's what I did. I went to Oxford.
I know.
Didn't get that.
But I'm trying to say something.
Okay, go. Okay.
Then you do this other thing, which is you teach. And your teaching is not good. You tell us stuff that's not true, that we can tell is not true. And then we say, okay, I can throw out the entirety of what he's saying.
What did I say that wasn't true, though? That's what I'm, that's, I
well,
mean,
1 times 1 is not equal to 2. Let's start there. In fact, I'm angry at Joe because Joe should have pushed back on that. Joe is in awe.
The
of the way
calculator says 1 times 1 doesn't equal 1 because of that square root of 2
Can we pull
issue.
the portal group back up?
There's a lot of wild shit I don't push back on if I'm not sure what the fuck that person's saying.
I understand.
That's why. But also because I know that people are going to eventually
But
respond
Joe,
to it.
right now we've got a crisis where nobody knows what to believe. And unfortunately for you,
I'm just saying
you were
there's
in a
a-
bad spot because you wanted to have fun. You had a show and it got really big. Okay.
That's
No,
why you're
I'm
here, Big
just saying-
Daddy.
Okay, wait.
I'm saying people have.
Can we go to the Terrence product, maybe below that?
And look, I'm not saying that Joe Rogan needs to call out and debate every single person that comes on the show, but once again, this time, it did feel as if he knew exactly what he was doing, meaning that he was simply trying to keep the narrative alive, that Terrence Howard was actually brilliant, so that way he could build up hype, and whenever he was back on the show to debate an actual expert, he would have a massive episode. Kind of how back then, people would argue and have conversations trying to explain why Conor McGregor actually had a chance against Floyd Mayweather. Now, I was part of the group that actually believed that Conor McGregor had a small chance of winning, but I mean, it's fighting. You know, anything could have happened. But now looking back, that was pretty silly. But for example, when it comes to Joe Rogan, he actually tried to defend Terrence Howard and explain why he was brilliant and had this wild conversation that, it was actually so dumb that a lot of huge creators and other channels covered it because of how wild it was.
Terrence Howard? Yeah, no, I don't even know what to say. I was like Googling shit to talk about after that. But what the what in the actual
First of all,
I understand it though.
I kind of
understand it. I understand.
I mean, it made sense.
To me, he's making me
sense.
believe.
He's way too smart to just be making everything up. Like this, there's no way he's a lunatic. Like I've heard people say,
you can't
he's
just come up on that. You
He's
can't
making
just
things. I'm like, I don't think that's correct. He knows too much.
No.
So is he correct? I don't know. And then that's what has to happen is Terrence Howard has to sit down with someone who's an academic, someone who's got a PhD in whatever discipline they're talking about, and they can have a discussion, and you can see what he really knows and just what he can say to me, right? To me, it all makes sense, but I'm a moron.
No, you're not.
But if you're talking to a mathematician or if you're talking to a physicist, someone who actually can understand what these computations mean and what he's trying to say about 1 + 1 or 1 multiplied by 1 can't be
like
1.
no mathematics.
Yeah.
Everything is shit. I believe that. I wasn't good in algebra.
And also, to anyone that listened to or watched the whole thing, the full 4 hours, once again, it became very clear that not only was Terrence Howard great at communicating and had crazy confidence, but he also 1000% believed what he was saying, which honestly, it goes a long way. And in terms of being a Joe Rogan guest, he absolutely delivered, because it is a known thing that people will either save their story, a really good story, to tell it on the show, or they really prepare in order to have a good appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast. And in terms of having an entertaining episode, well, the Terrence Howard episode was absolutely entertaining, to say the least, because even if you knew what he was saying was wrong or were skeptical about it, it's like watching those videos where a fake martial artist goes against an actual fighter and then gets completely demolished, because even if it's tough to watch, you go, yeah, I mean, what was a fake martial artist thinking? Now, the difference is that when it comes to Terrence and Eric Weinstein, Eric did try his best to explain why Terrence was wrong and why he made the scientists and the mathematicians mad, because Terrence was acting like he was on the same level as everyone else. And at some point, he even reached out to one of the scientists trying to teach them what he knew, which is absolutely insane.
Because the first thing is, what is the nature of Terrence's ideas? I don't think Neil actually understood some of your ideas, to be entirely honest.
No, and what he forgot is when I say 1 × 1 = 2, that's a metaphor for challenging the status quo. Despite the fact that the square root of 2 has all of its issues when you cube it or you multiply it by 2, which creates a contradiction, despite the fact that the square root of 2 has a problem with the prime numbers, the fact that they call number 2 a prime number.
2 is different. I mean, you will find that mathematicians will often talk about proving something for characteristic not equal to 2. So they'll single out 2 as being just very, very different. So look that up when we're done.
Yeah, but why? But why would they do
because
that?
in part of what you're saying, the prime 2, it does belong as a prime, but it is also special. You know, if you say 1 times 1 equals 2, everybody knows that that's crazy. But what you actually may mean, and what the fact that you don't use certain terms, or the fact that you use certain pronunciations that communicate to me something very positive, which is that you taught yourself. You learned the stuff from reading about it because nobody taught you, or you wouldn't pronounce certain words the way you pronounce them.
True.
The reason that people are in part going to freak out about your stuff is that we have a vulnerability, and that vulnerability says that from a single contradiction, if you can sneak one contradiction through TSA, the entire airport collapses. Everything that we do just is destroyed. And so the idea is that the security on mathematics and physics and the physical sciences is extraordinary for outside ideas because the first contradiction in the unity of knowledge destroys all of it.
And once again, even though, yes, Eric Weinstein is an actual physicist and an expert mathematician, it is very clear that he's not the best when it comes to social interactions or public speaking, because at some point, it did seem like he was struggling on that podcast appearance against Terrence Howard, because for some reason, he wanted to control every single thing about the conversation, all the things that they were talking about, and the direction that it was heading into, which, you know, it is a little bit weird. And he also sounded like he wanted to please everyone, meaning Joe Rogan, Terrence Howard, and the entire audience. And on top of that, at some point, he was sweating a lot. Now, to be fair, Eric Weinstein's approach to the whole conversation was actually really nice, because him trying to steal all of Terrence's ideas before going in and actually destroying them, it showed that he actually was trying to understand where he was coming from and not just there to try and make him look bad. And so because of that, it kept the conversation friendly for the most part. And even when Eric Weinstein actually told Terrence to his face that he was wrong about something, it never really escalated to anything more than that.
Tetrians disappear. That interior space, it's no longer there.
Okay.
The moment that disappears. So
I don't know how to stop you from doing this because
I hate doing that.
Well,
I hate
no.
you stopping me from doing what I'm not supposed to be doing.
No, I don't. Terry, I'm so far out over my skis. I promise you what the internet is going to say the next day about me is, Eric Weinstein sees blah, blah, blah.
Don't read the internet. Stop reading the damn internet.
Okay, what I'm trying to tell you is you're taking all the good stuff that you're doing and you're to 19 and you're saying hit me. And each time you do that, I want to slap you and say, don't do that. Because even if what you're saying is true, let's imagine that we find some structures like the ones you're talking about in wave fronts, right? I think what you're doing is totally canonical and it's very, very natural. And I think you're building models and you don't know how to do the algebra probably, and you probably don't know how to do the differential equations, all that. Fine, I can point you to books, I can try to help you.
I'm a geometer. I like doing geometry. I would love to work with a mathematician that can define and redefine these spaces and write new axioms if there's real axioms to be made from it or postulates to be made from it. That's what I wanted to do with with Dr. Tyson.
Okay, but part of what you're doing is you're coming into another community. Like what you said about David Tong is so unfair to David Tong.
Now, when it comes to Eric Weinstein, I was never a big fan. I mean, I had seen him a lot on Joe Rogan's podcast. I knew he was a physicist and that at some point he was in charge of Theo Capital, if I remember correctly. So I knew he was very intelligent. But the one thing that I do remember him from was the time that Tim Dillon completely trolled them and pretty much exposed them for not being able to take a joke. And that he also worried way too much about what other people thought about him. And the same thing happened with the Terrence episode, because he was pretty much worried about what the internet would react or how they would react. And to be fair, I thought he did a pretty good job, all things considered, because at some point he even cornered Terrence so bad that he actually said that 1 × 1 = 2 was just a metaphor, when, you know, clearly that's not the case, because he even made up some math to back it up. But again, it was mostly friendly. And even towards the end, Eric Weinstein actually tried to relate to Terrence Howard by pretty much complaining about the peer review process, which makes sense because Eric Weinstein has been a critic of it for a while. And once again, it does remind you that even though Eric is very intelligent, he can also be very emotional.
This is going to go out into the world. I was, you know this question, like, what has Eric Weinstein ever done? I did that. I did the marginal revolution using gauge theory.
Stop. That question is Tim Dillon joking around.
Everyone goes, Eric Weinstein's a genie. Does anyone know why? What is there anything they've done? No, truly, because all they do is talk. Is there anything they've built? Is there one appliance that they have anything to do with?
Yeah, I know.
He said, "What did he never created the Rotato?" He was just joking. He was fucking around.
That was the funny part about it. He was joking.
But he's saying that because he knows you're brilliant.
Do
you understand? The only reason why he can say that, if you were a loser, he couldn't say that.
You don't need to make me feel good about myself.
I know, but you brought it up again.
No, I'm saying something completely different.
Okay.
I actually have been scared of this question.
What question?
Tim's question taken seriously.
Who's going to take it seriously?
I'm taking it seriously.
Okay.
And now looking back, it was very clear that Joe Rogan was actually shocked by how much Eric Weinstein was bothered by what Tim Dillon said on his own show. And because of that, he probably knew that Terrence Howard versus Eric Weinstein would be a great episode. And it was, for the most part, except when Eric Weinstein would pretend or act like he was way too smart for the conversation, which maybe he was. But then he would go on and answer with some long rants that didn't really help much, because by the time he was done, Terrence would quickly move on to a different subject and continue the conversation without a problem. And also, whenever something like this happens, the question is always why. For example, with Cat Williams, you could easily argue that it all translated to ticket sales and better deals potentially, but with Terrence, there wasn't really anything that he was selling besides pushing the narrative that he's a genius. And also, he does have a website where he sells merchandise, and it looks like at some point you'll be able to buy the items that he was showing on the podcast, which is, it looks pretty cool, but for now it's just the merchandise and also the random supplement that he was plugging the first time that he was on the podcast.
Because all this started in third grade. I was arguing with my teacher because we were talking about the square root of 100. Oh, my God.
Is that your phone?
Yeah, that's my detox thing. I'm supposed to detox right now.
How do you detox? You detox on a timer? What do you do?
There's, my wife got me these things, because I'm supposed to take this.
What is that?
And
Pure Body Extract.
And there's another one.
Advanced Daily Cellular Detox. What's in this? Oh boy.
And this too.
What's in this stuff?
Just things to counteract the natural the metals that we have in our bodies that wear us out.
And you just take these periodically throughout the day on a timer?
I got to do it now. I got to do it.
Okay.
I take a dropper, part of that dropper, and then 4 sprays, and it removes the parasites from your system. Like oil of oregano, like using oil of oregano instead of using antibiotics.
And have you felt an effect?
Yes.
Yeah? What do you feel when you take this stuff?
I used to have really thick, dark circles under my eyes. That's gone away in the last 6 months. I've been using that. My skin, I'm 55 years old. I'm 55 years old and I smoke. Do I look like I'm 55 years old?
No, you don't. You look great. And do you think that's because of this?
I think, well, I'm going to show you a picture of what I used to look like.
Now, I couldn't find any connection between Terrence Howard and the supplement company besides a random link that I believe shows that him and his wife were potentially selling it, but nothing directly with the company. And even though I wasn't expecting Joe Rogan to try and expose the supplement itself, because who knows what it really is, at the very least, I thought he would actually call out the obvious plug, because, I mean, to have an alarm that interrupts the podcast within 40 minutes of it starting, just so that you can take a detox supplement, I mean, Joe Rogan has gotten mad for way less than that. And funny enough, at some point, it did look like Terrence was waiting for Joe Rogan's reaction. And once he saw that he was cool, he relaxed and then started talking about the product. And Joe Rogan did question it a little bit. I mean, he asked about his diets and all that stuff, but he was way too nice about the product, because the one thing that Joe Rogan could be considered an expert on is supplements. I mean, he owns a supplement company and has been taking them forever. Terrence didn't even say it was his own brand or his own product. And Joe Rogan Rogan was way too happy to take a look at it and plug it on the show. Now, by this point of the conversation, it was very clear that Terrence wasn't changing his mind at all, and that potentially no one could really help him, because even towards the end of the show, he actually told Eric Weinstein that if he found anything that he was saying interesting, that they could actually have a conversation after the show, which is absolutely insane because, I mean, after watching what Neil deGrasse Tyson said about him on that video, and then after listening to the whole conversation between him and Eric Weinstein, I mean, it's very clear that he really doesn't have anything new to add to the scientific community. And not only did he tell him that he was wrong, but he also told him to stop teaching. And by the way, if we use Eric Weinstein's MMA analogy, it would be like if a beginner MMA fighter challenged a pro fighter and talked about how his new style could beat anyone. Then he gets into an actual fight, gets demolished, and then tells a pro that if he liked anything about his style, that they could have a conversation about it after the fight. Which, again, wild and delusional. However, this whole thing did remind me of old school JRE, and that was actually pretty cool. And who knows, maybe a conversation between Eric Weinstein and Neil deGrasse Tyson would be fun and interesting. But the thing that really blows my mind, and it's really shocking, is how Terrence Howard, by just being way too confident and delusional, actually created a huge chaos online and within the scientific community, which is wild to think that at some point Joe Rogan and Terrence Howard would be the ones to do that, but it did happen. However, now it's very clear that actual physicists and mathematicians know that Terrence Howard doesn't know what he's talking about, but it will be interesting seeing what he does next. And at some point, I actually thought that he was doing all of this as a way of coping with the fact that he was left out of one of the biggest franchises in the world. But who knows, maybe he is really passionate about science and will continue to pursue it. But I mean, based on those conversations, it's not looking too good. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Dislike if you didn't like the video. But that is all we have for today. See ya.